Hello, hello. This is Chris Jansen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast. The End Evil podcast based, inspired by the book, The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. My hope is to do anything and everything possible to change the dynamic of evil being the prevalent force around us. Like Jeremy Locke's quote, evil is the destruction of freedom. Today is a special episode. I brought with me, I asked somebody who I've looked up to from a distance, Douglas Martin, who I saw his work through Seed 4. I'm wearing the shirt today to show off what I thought was a terrific event. And I had the opportunity to watch Douglas Martin's presentation at Seed 4, and I was able to review some of his older presentations, and I loved his work. So I asked him to meet with me today and come on the End Evil podcast, and he agreed to. So thanks for coming, Douglas. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Great to be here with you.
Yeah, you got the world map behind there. One thing I really appreciate about your work is that you're super thorough, and you brought a lot of details and a lot of things I've been curious about in my journey. So I thought I'd start off by kind of asking you a little bit about your journey and what brought you to being, I can tell that you're a self-taught researcher. You've done heavy research, way more than I have. And, you're on the One Great Work Network now as a presenter. And I know you've done those presentations at the Seed Conference. So I'm curious, what got your mind into looking so deep into these topics? And, I know you look into anthropology, ethnology, and natural law, just to name a few. How did you come down this road to being curious about these things that most people don't seem to care about?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting journey that I've had. For me, it kind of started out with Zeitgeist. So, I had Nate riding my ass for a while, wanting me to watch Zeitgeist, and I finally watched it. And the first time I watched it, I was resilient to it. It was bothering me, and I couldn't even get through it. I was having all kinds of emotional reactions to it. Part of it was I realized that my attention span had been diminished, and I just didn't have the focus. And I ended up going back to college, and definitely had made some improvements there in my thinking abilities. But from the Zeitgeist, I kind of went right into Alex Jones. And I did some serious diligence, and I learned a lot from Alex in his early days, probably, but back before 2000, probably around 2007, started listening to Alex quite regularly. And I did feel like I kind of went the whole 9 yards with that, and I kind of graduated out of that and started going a little bit into mysticism. Anything earth, air, water, and fire. That was me. I'm going there. I got to find out. And started running down mysticism. And kind of exhausted that research to a degree, and wanted to go farther. Well, I think the thing that really pushed me over the edge was seeing the movie Apocalypse Now. At some point, I decided to raid Kurtz's library, and I started reading those books in the library, primarily From Ritual to Romance by Jesse L. Weston and The Golden Bough by Sir James George Frazer. So that was my introduction into anthropology, and it took me a while to understand what that was or what that meant, and took me a long time to get my head around that little book of Jesse L. Weston, and that book did culminate a career, and it did win her the Crenshaw Prize. And her, the majority of her career is studying the legend of King Arthur. So I got into the Arthurian legends, started studying that, and all the while trying to relate that to Fraser's Golden Bough. And somewhere along the line, I'd gotten into Santos Bonacci's work on astrotheology, which I found very valuable, his early work. And then that actually led me to Mark Passio. And from Mark Passio, I got more answers than any other researcher that I had ever come across. And still studying Mark's work. He's got so much work, and it's all so prolific. And I've got a lot of benefit from studying Mark's work, and it's helped me a lot of the questions that I've had, and led me to some of the other authors that I admire, and very grateful to Mark for that. And now I'm on the One Great Network, or the One Great Work Network, with Mark and you. So it's a real honor to be here with you talking, and I've been looking forward to doing a show together. So
yeah, it gives me a lot of pride, a good feeling, especially that there's this community of people that I can reach out to, like I did you, and they're going to be excited to talk to me about things that most people I try to talk to about the subject matter, and they want to stop the conversation or turn away,
sure.
And with someone like you, I know the more we get into a topic, the more we're going to get excited and we're going to want to talk more about it. And so
Yeah.
I know that you have looked into the book The End of All Evil. I found out about that from Mark Passio, and I know that book made an impression upon you too. And
It
kind of
did.
the way I'm going with my podcast is, what really impressed, I had a very similar thing they did. When I came across Mark Passio's work, it tied a lot of things together for me, and I hadn't ever really encountered anybody that was brave enough or willing to talk about spirituality, and that was something I needed. And when he brought that together, that's really what made the connection for me. And so when I looked for a way to do my own podcast, The End of All Evil seemed appropriate, because that book's like really all encompassing, and it really just brings into focus this problem of evil in the world, and that evil's enslaving the world. So I'd be curious to see, I'd keep trying to explain to people my own version of what evil is and how to define it. And I still struggle a little bit with that. I like Locke says evil's the destruction of freedom. I'd be curious to see how you look at evil, how you define it, and what it means from your point of view.
Yeah, that book very influential for me. I actually ended up doing an entire reading of that book with Bill Church on the Free Your Mind podcast. Of course, I think we both discovered that book from Mark. And then, I went out and tried to buy a copy of it, and found out when I started looking, there was one available for like $500, and I should have jumped on it, because now you'd be lucky to find one. And if you do, it's probably going to be $1,500 and up now. But I thought, what, $500 for a paperback, this can't be right. But yeah, it was, and I should have bought it, because that was actually a good deal. But in regard to your question, yeah, it's important, because I agree with Jeremy Lux. I like to work with that definition, because I think that does help us identify what evil is. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to incorporate this into my line of rhetoric as we speak, is that I think people are generally conditioned to be authoritarian minded. And it's all about where the thought starts, the way Mark breaks down natural law expressions. It's all about where the thought starts. So if the thought begins from an authoritarian mindset, I would tell you that the manifestation of that is going to be chaos, because that's an action based in fear. The very need to control things in the extant typify fear. So I want to contrast that idea of being authoritarian minded to libertarian minded, which means you become sensitized to things that do threaten freedom. You become more conscious and more aware of things that can lead to loss of freedom. To understand the ancient elders, for instance, I would tell you that we have to develop that, because as long as we're authoritarian minded or focused on materialism and material ambition, we will never understand what the ancient cultures, particularly in Egypt, were trying to do. But so we have to understand that the authoritarian mindset is really where I see evil as the source of evil, because it's the ambition to control. It's the ambition to arbitrate the rules, arbitrate the law. And in the grand scheme of things, that amounts to trying to overthrow the laws of creation, which in my view is the same as overthrowing the creator itself. So
I like that. That's a good way to put it. Man's laws can't ever go beyond the laws of the way they were created, right? It's like a cake trying to make rules about an oven, it's just ridiculous, right? Where do things
agreed.
come from? Where do things come from? And I think, being able to ask difficult questions is an ability that is really lacking in modern culture. And I think that has to do with a lot of factors. But, I still have a lot of people I talk to that are very optimistic about humanity. And they seem to think that we're emerging out of a long, dark period and that things are getting better. I have my doubts about that. I would love to see a change in humanity, but what I see is a consistent thread all through history that I've been able to look at, showing humans enslaving one another and using that authority mindset that you're describing to control other people, and being accepting that that's normal or okay. And we've kind of gone from kings running people, different types of tyranny, to now the modern day tyranny, which is still slavery. It's just sort of a different brand of slavery. And I don't see that humans have really solved this problem yet. And we haven't gotten out of it yet. So one thing I really look to you is I know you're a really good researcher, and I like the way you look at ancient history, and I'm curious to see what your point of view on that is. Like, why are humans still enslaved? Why do they have trouble understanding that it is slavery? Would you call it as such?
I definitely would call it slavery. And not only that, I would go farther and say that we have, in the modern world at the present time, we have a very advanced phase of covert slavery that I see. Not on number one, it's more nefarious because it's deceptive. So covert in that sense is more diabolical than overt. But I think the ultimate plan is to take it back to overt via technology. But see, I would caution people on the way of thinking that you started out this with, thinking that the idea that things are just going to correct themselves. Because I know the phenomenon that is associated with that is people going through life as observers and, armchair quarterbacks that don't want to get any skin in the game, and the thinking that allows us to think that we don't have any responsibility to take measures to be proactive in this. That's part of the conditioning. That's part of the human story that, it hasn't always been this way. I equate that with our slide into materialism. And I think that that's a long story. It didn't happen overnight. It happened over a long period of time. But centuries, eons of oppression are part of our human story. And I do think the present circumstance with humanity is a condition, and that's good news because it means it's self-induced. We can undo it, but not without a colossal effort and a coordinated effort. But again, I would caution people about the idea, because I associate that with the thinking that we're stuck in time cycles, the idea that we've gone through, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and then we're going to return to the Golden Age. They associate that with an autonomous cycle, and I'm trying to explain that is not how I see it. That it will require a shift in consciousness. But see, that's, the Yuga cycles, for instance, I don't ascribe to that. It's because it bolsters the idea that we're just observers, and that, we're inevitably trapped in these time cycles. I see, freedom, first of all, as a function of consciousness. And the idea that if we were ever free in the past, it wasn't a function of a time cycle, is what I'm saying. It was a function of sheer willpower, and the willpower to understand and harmonize with the laws of the universe rather than to subjugate the laws or, ignore the laws and lead humanity into socialism, for instance, which is coercive government by my definition. So if I say the word socialism, I'm not referring to any left-right political ideology. I'm saying man's law and centralized control of resources. But
slippery slope into totalitarianism and tyranny.
Absolutely.
Right? Socialism's just a gradation of that slavery continuum, right?
Yeah, I mean, after all, it is a word, but we have ambiguity in the language, and that's part of our dilemma. So we do have a semantical dilemma. That's part of what we're dealing with. But I'm trying to get back to your original question there.
What I struggle with a lot of folks is you use the term slavery,
Yeah.
and they think right away of what they've seen in movies or what they've heard about early American slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And they equate that to, Black people in chains,
Right.
In the cotton fields. And I'm trying to point out that even during those period of time, people had certain they had certain ability to make decisions for themselves. They didn't all spend all their time being chained to something. They were still free to walk around. It's just different levels of what we call this slavery. What really makes the difference is, whether you're able to have the choice to do things or not. And I think what you brought up there is like a really key component, is the idea of choice, that we're not just observers on this reality, that there's something we're supposed to be doing with our time. So I guess that's another way to put the question is, what are we supposed to be doing with our time to deal with this?
Yeah, I want to answer that question. What separates us from the animal kingdom is our capacity for understanding principles. If we do not understand principles, then we're not really filling our role in nature. And that actually makes us, in my view, something less than animal, because we're abdicating our responsibility to fill our role in nature. But I think that there's something revealing about the ambiguity of this word slavery, because it's kind of a testament to how much we really genuinely do not understand freedom. So you and I both agree that slavery it encompasses much more than just the chattel slavery that we saw in the early colonialization of America. You know, we have to consider the real circumstances, which in many cases is manorialism. And we have to understand why manorialism is hostile to feudalism or hostile to centralized control. So it was easier for them to shut down all the manors and introduce 50 feudal territories with 50 landlords. That would make it much easier to bring that 50 feudal territories under a centralized control. And, you know, and I want to go ahead and say this while I'm thinking of it, because one of the things about the Constitution is it's become so ambiguous with so much revisionism and so many, redactions and amendments. It's become ambiguous as well. And one of the things I want to say about it is, if we get nothing else out of the Constitution, one thing that we can get out of it is it does reveal the amount of the tenacity and the the ambition of the founding fathers to tenaciously outline and separate every branch of government so power could never consolidate too much into one branch. So if everybody wants to agree or disagree about what the interpretations of the Constitution are, I think we can agree and look past that, and we can all agree that what the founding fathers are endeavoring to do is to ensure that too much power never consolidates into one area, particularly the federal government. You know, so we have to understand that. We have to understand why the federal government, for instance, would be interested in getting rid of the 10th Amendment, for example, because they don't want states' rights, you know. And I don't believe in any form of man's law, but when it comes to the principles that this country were founded on, I do think that the American Revolution was an action based in love. And I do fear to imagine where we'd be today had it never happened. You know, so I do see that as something that had become necessary, but that it would be in vain if we didn't recognize that everything that the founding fathers were trying to do was enshrine a doctrine that would prevent too much power from consolidating into too few hands.
Right. I've looked back a lot. One person that's kind of stuck out for me in history is Thomas Paine. I feel like the writings and the words of Thomas Paine were one of the big major inspirations that helped people get that gumption to actually fight for freedom. And
definitely.
And I look up to him as someone in history that wasn't really well liked, I think, by a lot of people during the time, especially towards the end of his life, because he spoke out in an honest way, even if it was going against the religion of people around him, on what he actually saw as being the truth. And it's pretty difficult to be a bearer of truth in a time when people are really stuck on a lie, you know. And so what comes to my mind, especially looking at the globe map behind you there, where we have a whole world that is very much convinced that this type of organization that we have in place with governments, military power, and police, and that it's the only way things can be. And when I try to explain to people anarchy means no rulers, they come back at me with, well, we can't just get rid of the rulers. It's going to be complete chaos, you know? So that's where people really struggle with. They can't see how to get from here to there, you know? And it seems impossible because we're in a situation where power really has been consolidated to a ridiculous extent. So I guess my question to you is, how do we help people understand that there's a better way to live if we can't show them how that is, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not a life coach, but I would tell you that there's things in life worse than death, and government is one of them. And it needs to be resisted with your entire mind, body, and soul. And you need to withdraw your consent anywhere that you can, anytime that you can, because you see, order following is a deplorable ideology. It's the idea that somebody else can decide what's best for you, or that somebody else knows better than you. And the appeal to it is to abdicate personal responsibility, not only to learn truth, but to be in harmony with truth, and to make every decision and every action based in your own conscious awareness of how that will affect the world. But my main point was, I wanted to say that because we don't understand the word slavery, I think it's a testament to how much we don't understand the word freedom. And I just wanted to say that our ideas for freedom, even at the time of the founding fathers, were essentially new ideas. So in our classical history, we don't have very many, if any, examples of real freedom. So most of the ideas that I see that we have for freedom happened largely post-Renaissance. And they also happened with the promise of the founding of America and the escaping of the the British Isles, the colonialists that came over here and seeking a better way of life. It's important to understand, because a lot of people know the terms. I don't really think that they fully understand what the situation is. But one of the most important things to understand when we study our history is that there's a difference between continental Europe history and the history of England. And the main difference is that in Europe, you have absolutism, which means it's the absolute power of the king. So and then in Britain, then you have a sharing of power between the crown and the barons, the landholders. That's important because after the fall of the Roman Empire, we had the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, and that's Rome's ambition to unite Europe and ultimately create world empire under the single banner of Latin Christendom. So in order to make that happen in Europe was much easier, because all they had to do was gain the allegiance of the king. And then that basically forced the subjects of the king to become vassals of the church. But in England, they had a real problem because of the power sharing between the barons and the crown. They were never really able to force the king to be a vassal of the church, therefore making Britain a papal fief or land grant. And it's because of that these ideas for freedom have made it into the modern world. So after the invasion in England of 1066 and the invasion of the Norman kings, everything in England became about the imposter kings trying to assimilate the English kings. And in order to do that, they had to make vows to the people to uphold the old laws of England. So that really is where we get the idea of common law. And I just wanted to make sure and get that on the table. That's where the idea of common law comes from. But all of our ideas about freedom mostly are, post-Renaissance. So, and in my view, since the spirit of revolution has waned in the wake of the French and the American Revolution, that I think there's a lot less people alive today, especially in terms of population and percentages, that even understand what freedom actually is than there was at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and then ultimately the Constitution. So
yeah, that's a scary thought. I remember myself when I came to certain realizations as I kind of came down this path. Some people call the conspiratorial thinking, or conspiracy theory research, right?
Yep.
What really finally hit me was that when you start trying to talk about these subjects publicly or out loud, there's a total dissonance where you're not getting through to people. There's a barrier. They're not
Yeah.
able to actually hear what you're saying, whether true or not. They're just not getting it. And what I really came to my mind is that picture of the Matrix, right? Neo waking up in this pod and looking around and seeing for miles and miles in every direction pods. And the future that I'm more concerned about has something like that, where people don't even know that they're in a cage because they're in a simulation, right? And they don't even realize that their actual body is sitting in this pod. And so I think that's closer to the real problem that we're heading towards in the future. If people aren't aware of the problem, then they don't know to fight against it. They don't know they should be fighting against it. And I think that's what I see happening in the public, and why it's so important for us to be bringing these conversations to people. So, but how to be effective at that when people still believe something like voting, for instance, is a good way to go to make decisions. Would you think, I mean, from my point of view, even voting itself is flawed. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the whole idea that a few people can make a decision and the other people just have to do as they say, right? So that takes away your choice or your ability to choose.
It's ridiculous and childish. It's ridiculous that people, adults, so-called adults, would even believe that, first of all, you're going to get a fair result. Second of all, that one man is fit to rule over a population of hundreds of millions of people. I mean, to me, statism is childish, and voting is childish, and believing in it is even more childish. It's a testament to, where the human consciousness is. And to me, it's a metric of spiritual bereft. The amount that somebody believes in authority is a metric of spiritual bereft. But if we don't know what a right is, we're not going to be able to defend that. And so we have to know what a right is. And we have to know that a law is an immutable condition, therefore cannot be changed nor arbitrated, nor is there any ambiguity in it. So the whole idea of man's law is based on arbitration. And the idea that it is legitimate is the idea that we've convinced enough people to accept this, that we can enforce this with physical violence without any repercussions to ourselves. And I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, the great legislator of today is the forgotten failure of tomorrow, because man's law is mutable, will always be mutable, therefore is not a law, is in fact just an edict or a rule. And it's only a matter of time before it's going to be changed or replaced with something probably worse. And
It does
yeah.
seem to be getting worse too, right? Like
Yeah.
when I first started going down this trail, it was 9/11, which was a huge magic trick, one of the biggest magic tricks the world has ever seen. A huge lie, a huge manipulation that involved a lot of people, and that was what woke me up to that. Yeah, there is a conspiracy. Okay. But now what we see going on in these events that have happened since 2020 is a good example. It's moved to a whole nother level. So I'm curious to see, how did 2020 hit you, and how did, events such as 9/11 false flag events affect you personally and change your thinking?
My initial reaction to 9/11 was that we were under attack. I wasn't really conspiracy minded back then. But Zeke guys certainly, helped me become, at least suspicious of the official narrative. And But like I say, the way that I see the change in society, or the way the societies have been effective, it's all hinging on this idea of order following. Because, this 2020 event has really, while it has essentially destroyed freedom, the little bit that we had left overnight, it has also revealed everybody's true colors. And I would tell you that's natural law working perfectly, because now you can really see, people for who they are and what they stand for. And in my view, it's reduced everybody that wants to stay in the working world to order followers. And most particularly, where I want to caution you with this is doctors. Because all doctors have, any doctors that have any of their own methods, those doctors have essentially been put out of business. They've been vetted with this. All of the medical people, including in law enforcement. If you ever had any idea there was any such thing as a good cop, well, I'm here to tell you that's all changed now. If it ever did exist, which I would tell you it never did, but if it did, they've all been vetted, because this whole pandemic is designed to force obedience and vet anybody who's disobedient. And as we read in Jeremy Locke's book, obedience is all that's required for evil to win. So that's the name of the game, is to create a world of order followers that are willing to comply without thinking. If we one of the things I want to say about the book 1984 is that it's, I know most people that have gone into conspiracy have read that book. Sometimes I wonder whether or not they're getting the same takeaway on it, but I want to make it clear that to me, that book is all about breaking the will. It's all about breaking the will. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that when, like you could see it in a movie when they show a torture situation. What do? They try to get the person being tortured to say something like Orwell's book, 1984. It was 2 + 2 is 5, right? If you can get someone to say something that's, obviously false, you've really got them under your control. They're living in an illusion. They're living in the pod, in the matrix. And that's what we saw going on in 2020, where, I really had to say, hey, I'm not in agreement with this stuff. I'm from construction. I've wore a dust mask a lot of my life. I know what a dust mask does and what it doesn't do. And what it doesn't do is keep out dust reliably, much less things that are infinitesimally smaller than dust. So on your face is a lie, in where I was living.
An obvious lie too.
Obvious, right? Sticking right out.
So you have to go into an extreme level of cognitive dissonance to accept any of this. The idea that we're going to send our children to public schools, but they'll be okay if they wear a mask. If there was a real pandemic, you would not send your children anywhere in public because it would be far too dangerous without a hazmat suit on. And you wouldn't be there either because it would be far too dangerous without a hazmat suit on. And it's ridiculous that they've gotten people to capitulate to this, but it shows you where the consciousness is at. And, that's a testament to where they are with their agenda. So, this is a long-term plan, and anybody that doesn't understand that is very naive or very stupid.
Well, I'd like a little bit your opinion on that, because the other thing I struggle with people I talk to that really aren't quite, from my point of view, all the way there, is they really struggle. A lot of people really struggle with this idea of conspiracy, that there is a they, that there is some sort of centralized power that's planning these things. And, that's not like one of the hardest things people have to accept. How would you explain that there is centralized, this stuff is coming from a central place, and that there is a they, even though if we can't necessarily define who they are?
Well, I would first of all, I would recommend reading Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, where he talks about the definition. You know, we have a semantical dilemma. So this term communism, it has ambiguity. But in Locke's or in Gary Allen's book, he's trying to define communism as the global conspiracy for world government. So we have to understand that the nature of the beast. So, you know, we're talking about how to understand evil. Well, part of understanding evil is understanding this nature of this beast, which is really, you know, stemming from the very individual level of the ego's ambition to control. That's where it starts. And the government is the full materialization or manifestation or metastazation of this ambition to control. You and I both agree that we accept Jeremy Locke's definition as evil as anything that which destroys freedom. So we start paying attention to that, and we start understanding how these things are a direct threat to freedom. And like I say, the ruling class wants to see us all in compliance. So this is the perfect way to vet society. You know, the idea that in the major wars that the civilians are just simply caught in the crossfire, I would caution you to rethink that. Because in World War One, you know, there was mutual interest on both sides to reduce the population, for instance, because they all feared Bolshevism. So they feared the power of the rising power of the labor class. So there was mutual interest on every side of that conflict that had an interest in reducing the population because of the fear of Bolshevism. So it wasn't really a matter of, you know, how where they were worried about taking mass casualties. It was a matter of, as long as casualties were equal on both sides of the conflicts, things were looking, you know, tenable. But yeah, we really can't afford to be naive about this. And I may have gotten a little bit off the track about what you were saying there, but you know,
Well,
we're talking about how to define evil. So, you know, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to narrow it down. You know, what people want is to say, okay, who's doing it? You know, they want a simple answer, right? And
Yeah.
it's not an easy answer. I've often put it this way. We think about like a criminal organization, like a gang, right? That gets busted for doing something terrible. Like that's a criminal gang or organization that didn't do a very good job at what it's doing because it got caught.
Right.
So the criminal gang or organization that's running things in the current time hasn't been caught yet. That's why they're doing so well, you know. And so it's really hard to define exactly who they
That's
are,
because it makes
you know?
everything that it does legal and legitimate on paper.
Right. And I think what I felt like you're getting at, and what I agree with, is this is a spiritual battle ultimately.
Ultimately, it
In
is.
order to
Yes.
win it, we don't really, you and I, the average person, doesn't really need to know who's on the council of evil, you know, who they particularly are. But there are things that we can do to change this dynamic, and I'm fully convinced that that's possible. And so I think we're kind of at that point in the conversation where I'd like to go a little more solution based. Like, so if we can't define who these evil people are that are enslaving the world, what do we do about it? Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. You know, I often say, you know, weak minds talk about people, better minds talk about events, and enlightened minds talk about ideas. Um, because if we're looking for the who, we're talking about every culture and every ethnicity, every walk of life is involved in this communism, which I've, you know, agreed with Gary Allen's definition that communism is the global conspiracy for world government. So, you know, to really understand that, we have to understand, you know, the Greek democracy and the Roman Republic and where these ideas came from and what they actually are. You know, we have to understand that the republic typifies a nation with a border, and that you know, the Greek ideal of democracy was more of a view of a world community, and that's in the modern world associated with leftist ideology, whereas Republican is associated with rightist ideology. But the main thing I'm saying is the view of the world community is part of how communism gets associated with the leftist ideology, when in fact it's really just a conspiracy for global government. And you know, democracy is used to sell because that's an appeal from the elite, that the average person can have affairs or a voice in affairs of the state. And we have to understand that democracy represents mob rule, which is ideally a dangerous prospect because that's rule by the most ignorant. So as much as I would be opposed to dictatorship, I would tell you you'd probably be in better hands with dictatorship because at least they know what they're doing. But yeah, because democracy is mob rule. So the idea of our government system in this country is a democratic republic, and that means that the inalienable rights that are enshrined to us by God cannot be voted away from us and are enshrined in our code of law. That's the republic aspect of it. And then the democracy can function as we can, you know, as average citizens participate in affairs of the state, with the republic aspect as acting as a protection for our inalienable rights. That's what the system is supposed to be. But what I'm trying to put the emphasis on is the idea that communism is a conspiracy for global government in which all walks of life are participating in. And I want to put one more emphasis on the fact that because the world leaders know and probably see that as an ultimate inevitability, they know their own power is waning. So we have to understand that part of the nature of the beast is the power will ultimately, inevitably consolidate and centralize. So all world governments would agree that they're going to have world government, but they probably disagree on who's going to be at the helm. So that's part of what's going on in the struggle in the upper echelons. However, it's clear that there is a conspiracy for global government. I would tell you you're living under it now. And I would tell you that the last vestiges of the governments that are left and are in large are theatrical. I'd say the fact that this country hasn't been completely disarmed yet is one of our only hopes of ever stemming the tide of this communism, which I have defined as the conspiracy for global government.
Yeah, that's well put. And it puts the emphasis and the responsibility back on the shoulders of the individual and
That's right.
the individual communities. One thing that what comes to my mind is, okay, I made a move right about the time of 2020. The area I was living, about an hour north of San Francisco, was so extreme in their communism style of appreciating mandates and following rules.
I bet.
And so universal in that area that I felt like I was surrounded by enemies. And I moved to an area further out of the city. I've moved twice, but where I live now, it's quite a bit different. I'm amazed how many people have a little bit more understanding of freedom when you get further out of the city into the country. Northern California does have people. Now, there tends to be a more of a religious Christianity based, but people that have kind of what I would call old-fashioned ideals. And some of those ideals are touching on freedom. However, what I see happening, the coalitions that are forming and the people that are forming groups are looking to like replace the supervisors or replace the county officials.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, that's wasted time, energy. So I'd be curious to see what your point of view is on people think they can make a difference through political action. And if not, what should they be doing?
Well, I think you and I will both agree with what I'm going to say here. Ideally, it is a spiritual lesson. Man's law is not going to solve this problem, and voting in new people, you might end up with something worse than what you have now, and eventually you inevitably will. We have to understand we're living in a world filled with moral relativism and social Darwinism. And ultimately, the cream that rises to the top of that paradigm is always going to be the most psychopathic among us. So we have to understand that, the idea that somebody could have joined the Nazi party and changed it from within, do you really think that? Do you really think that was possible? If we have a system where we vote leaders in and out, how long do you really think that how much time do you really think it is before someone like Hitler or worse gets in there? There's a lot of things to consider, but no, I don't think there's a solution there. Maybe a temporary solution, but at best, again, it's temporary. It's still going to ultimately align with the global agenda, because that's where the power is. And I see most of the people, or I say I see all people that go into politics that are people that are ambitious in their own career, not people that are genuinely philanthropic. And I know some of them have convinced themselves that they are, and that it's just this way, and if we want to make change, we have to operate inside the system. But at a deeper level, I know that people aren't really believing in that bullshit. But they've managed to convince themselves that it's true. But like I say, I think that the leaders in this world, they already know that the global government is an inevitability, and one of the things that means is that their own power is on the wane. So and maybe they don't see that happening in their lifetime, but I guarantee they know their power is on the wane, because they know the global conspiracy for communism is on the rise, and it's an inevitable. And I want to tell you that I think you and I, as far as that goes, our common ground is Jeremy Locke. And I think that it's part of our common ground. And I think that it is ultimately, we can understand the nature of the beast, the nature of the beast to control. And anybody trying to control is that which destroys freedom. So I think you and I agree that that government, for instance, is evil because it wants to control, and that people that want that power want control. And that to me is an action based in fear. So, and there's a lot more to say about it. One of the things I wanted to say when I got on here today, and time's going kind of fast, but I wanted to come on here and let you guys know that I really support your efforts on the One Great Work Network. And I did manage to catch some of the funnel conference. However, a lot of it I watched after the conference had taken place. I was watching some of it live, but I've managed to see most of the presentations, including yours, from the conference, and I was really impressed by everybody's work. And I would really appreciate the support that you guys gave us for the Seed Conference. That was one reason I wanted to come on your show, was to show my support for what you guys were doing with that you're doing with Will and John. And I'm a fan of your work. I'm a fan of their work. And I wanted to come on here and let you guys know that, I really appreciate your efforts in that.
Thanks, Douglas. I mean, you were an inspiration for me. And I think that just goes to show, for maybe someone watching now, get inspired. Douglas inspired me, and then I came into my group and said, hey, let's try to do what they did. and they got inspired, and then we did our conference, and I think that's going to inspire someone else to do a similar thing. To me, this is the solution. Like I described to you, I've tried to have these conversations with many people over the years, and I'm sitting here just smiling when I hear your reply to the things I bring up. Something that's really, something pops out for me every time I have one of these conversations, and one that popped out for me this time, something you were saying, talking about, you know, the level we're at as beings, and so many people are operating on that animalistic level where they think humans are basically evil, and that we don't have a choice, where we have to be that way, and they don't have that ability to be optimistic and say that we can rise above that animalistic. You know, I'm always trying to make the argument with people that we're not like animals. We have abilities animals don't have. But when you look at the way people are actually acting, they're not using those abilities. So no wonder they see us as like animals, because that's
Well,
kind of the way we're acting, right?
yeah, they all just got a little flashy thing at the Grammy Awards.
So yeah, I mean, I think we could do a lot better. And I think the underlying message from it, when you read The End of All Evil, Jeremy Locke, he describes that evil is going to lose. You know, it can't win, because, you know, it's just taking away from what good is, and that eventually evil's going to be extinguished. And so, you know, on that note, the optimism, you know, I try to push that in too. I don't think that we are
That's
evil
right.
beings, you know. So I'd like to hear you kind of conclude on that note. You know, give us what your optimism is.
Yeah,
What is
that
the
is
hope?
my yeah, that is the hope. And I like the way that you said that. Ultimately, evil is an illusion. And you know, and it's the mind, the ego playing tricks on the mind. But that well, I had it. And I don't want to forget what I was going to say, but so let me just take a minute. Kind of help me out here.
Yeah, like that it is one of the things I struggle with. I think of like the tree of life, right? That's
Yeah,
good. That's life. It's growing. If you get in there and start cutting one of the branches off, or
I got it.
you know, you're
Yeah.
destroying that connection, right?
Yeah, you said it. See, yeah, the human is you know, this is what people don't really understand. They want to believe that humans are inherently, rapid in quotes, evil, or born good or evil. And this, you know, religion plays a lot of a role in how we've been conditioned into thinking that way. But I would also tell you that Roman pragmatism and materialism has helped us arrive in this human condition. What we need to understand, one of the things that we have to understand, is that humans are born neither good nor evil, but that we are born like a computer, programmable. So if we put bad information in, we're going to get a bad result out. If we put good information in, we're going to get a better result out. So humans are programmable like a computer. And maybe some people, you know, won't like hearing that. But, you know, the sooner we face it, the sooner we can deal with it. And then the rest of it, we're talking about the nature of evil. That's why one reason it's so important to study history and study political science, because that's how we learn the nature of the evil and the intrigue that is associated with it. And that the air is rife with intrigue. And by that, I mean conspiracies to plot against each other, to control each other for materialistic ambition and tenure and accolades and, you know, social strata, so we can have god men in ivory towers festooning themselves, you know. And it's, you know, I mean, I have to tell us that it's something less than animal. So if you want to compare yourselves to an animal in that condition, I would say that you're insulting the animal, because you're not filling your role in nature to abdicate your responsibility to truth. And that's something less than animal. So
That's a good point. And so there's the encouragement is, you know, get in touch with your spiritual self. Look through the lens of whether this is freedom or not freedom. When we begin to share that lens, and we're all looking through that lens of freedom or slavery, then we're going to be able to see the world in a different way, and we're going to be able to see what we can be doing and what we should be doing with ourselves and our time and our energy. And we can then start to see the results of putting in positive energy and not controlling others. Then we might be able to see some of the results of that in the long term. And that's going to take some time, it's going to take some patience, and it's going to take a lot of willpower. But luckily, people like Douglas are out there working on this project, and you can check out more of Douglas's work on the onegreatworknetwork.com. And I don't know, is there going to be another seed conference?
Yes, there will. And also check out my work at thecubbyhole.com. You can find information there about seed as well. And the other organizers for the seed conference are on the One Great Network. That's Brandon Martin and Nate Cap.
Nate Cap, Brandon Martin. Yep. Yeah, great work. So those guys are doing.
Yep. And I really like the work that you are doing with John Wydogan and Will Keller.
The Natural Freedom League, yeah.
Give a shout out to those guys. Really love what you're doing, guys. Keep up the great work. We are going to do another seed. I heard you guys say something about doing another conference in the fall.
Yeah, Funnel 2, we're starting to plan it.
So, yeah, if you need any help from me, just give me a heads up.
Appreciate it.
And, I have a presentation I'm working on now. I'm about halfway through. I've already put out the first half, and I'm working on finishing out the second half. And I've been doing some shows with Francisco, and I got some shows coming up where I'm going to be on there. Francisco Sani, and I'm going to do some shows with Ivan from Phoenix too. We're going to break down some films for you.
Awesome. Right on. I can't wait to check out that work. And
yeah,
man, like, so appreciate you spending this time with me, Douglas. I got a lot of good thoughts out of it, and I hope it helps other folks who have the opportunity to watch. And I'll look forward to our next interaction conversation. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a real pleasure, and I've been wanting to come on your show for a while now. So thank you for that. And I'll look forward to coming back on, hopefully in the near future.
Excellent. Evil is the destruction of freedom. Hello, this is Chris Jansen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast.
It was a crazy year, 2020. I think everybody kind of was losing their mind one way or another. But if you're listening to this, you made it through.
And they're making mistakes, and people are starting to awake.
There is a science of human freedom.
It's also a spiritual.